Hello everyone, we are Team F, and today we are excited to present our country profile on Brazil as part of the Andes Researchers Initiative. In this presentation, we will analyze key factors for Australian firms considering expansion into Brazil. Our team will address how globalization has shaped its political economy, evaluate its economic and human development, explore cultural differences with Australia, recommend trade specialization strategies, and examine current trade policies. Let's begin with Xinyu, who will discuss our first topic.
Hello everyone, today I'm going to talk about how global has changed the Brazil political, economic, and problems that Australian companies may face with the legal system if they want to business in Brazil. Brazil has the biggest economic in Latin America because of advancement. It has gone through big changes and now faces its own problem. Brazil's business and politics have changed a great deal because of progress. In terms of the economy, it has pushed the country to be more open to trade and investment from other countries. Especially in the 1990s, Brazil is now part of the world's supply line. The extra money from other countries has helped build the things and grow industries, especially in mining production and farming. But trade has also made the gap between towns and countryside even bigger in terms of income. Brazil's political tie with other countries like the WTO and UN have grown stronger thanks to trade. Uh, this have this has made freedom grow. However, competition and economic challenges from other countries have made EU's policy unclear, which has led to fights over worker rights and environmental protection. That's because trade has made it easier for Brazil music and sports to spread around the world. This has led to more cultural exchange, but has also made people worry about how mixing cultures may hurt different customers in the area. And the Australian business have a hard time to figure out how to use Brazil's law system. To begin, Brazil's legal system is built on civil law, which is very different from Australia's common law system. Brazil's law are very complicated and are always changing, especially when it comes to things like tax and work laws. The second one, Brazil has one of the most complicated tax system in the world, with big changes in how taxes are handled between states and cities. This means that Australian companies that do business in more than one region have to make sure they follow the rules. And the third one is Brazil has made a progress in fighting graph, but it is still a problem, and government progressing are often slow and complicated, which makes it take longer for business to get re regressed and approved. And the last one is Brazil's labor laws are very protective of workers. They have strict rules about things like minimum wages, working hours, your future pay, and more. Australia's business need to change to comply with these strict labor rules, so they don't get punished and business runs smoothly. In conclusion, the trade has had a big impact on Brazil's political economic, bringing both chances and problems. For Australian companies to be successful, they need to understand and be able to use Brazil's completed the law system. Thank you, and let's move on the next question.
Thank you, Xinyu. Evaluating a country's economic strength typically begins with GDP and GNI. Brazil's data reveals its GDP and per capita GNI have followed nearly identical long-term trends. This pattern is common among large economies because the same fundamental factors influence both measures, including economic cycles, policy shifts, and global conditions. The net income from a board, which represents the primary difference between GNI and GDP, remains relatively small compared to Brazil's domestic economic output. And you might be wondering, what caused the recession in the middle 2010s? Research by Tupy suggests this was not caused by any single factor, but rather resulted from multiple convergent forces. Their study specifically identifies three key drivers: a sharp shift in economic policy, severe domestic political instability, and the downturn in commodity prices. To more accurately assess living standards and real purchasing power, economists focus on purchasing power parity, adjusted GNI per capita. World Bank data shows Brazil's current GNI per capita stands at approximately 20,000 US dollars, qualifying it as an upper middle income country. This indicates a substantial economy with an established middle class, representing potential market opportunities for Australian companies. The Human Development Index, on the other hand, provides a comprehensive assessment of national development across three key dimensions: health, education, and living standards. According to UNDP's data, Brazil achieved 0.76 in 2022, classifying it in the high human development category and ranking 89th globally. Brazil has demonstrated remarkable progress in human development since 1990, with its HDI showing substantial improvement. This upward path reflects Brazil's sustained investments in foundational services and infrastructure that enhance population welfare, leading to tangible gains in overall citizen capabilities and life quality. For Australian businesses, this development suggests a healthier workforce, potential consumer with stronger cognitive abilities, and a relatively stable social foundation. However, examining the most recent HDI data reveals that growth has frozen or even slightly declined. Where Brazil remains in the high development category, this slowing momentum indicates growing challenges in sustaining improvements. As highlighted in Souza's research, the pandemic recently impacted areas closely tied to HDI. School closure negatively affected academic performance among disadvantaged students, which is expected to lead to higher dropout rates. Additionally, the pandemic worsened Brazil's existing poverty and income inequality problems. Finally, ineffective government responses and anti-science movements during the pandemic worsened Brazil's social and public health challenges. Although HDI provides valuable social insights, economic indicators generally carry more direct and critical significance for Australian companies. GDP helps determine the size of the target market, while instability in GDP and GNI directly affects investment return expectations and operational risks. Furthermore, since GDP may overstate market opportunity available to ordinary consumers, purchasing power parity um, directly relates to target consumers. This serves as the primary filter for evaluating market profitability and offers more meaningful guidance than GDP rankings. While economic indicators are more important, this does not mean HDI can be ignored. Brazil typically ranks among the world's top 12 economies by nominal GDP, but its HDI ranking is only 89th. This significant gap serves as an important risk indicator, suggests that economic growth may not have translated into widespread social progress. Potential social conflicts and structural issues could affect the long-term business environment. And now I will hand over to Li Rong.
Okay, thanks for my group members' introduction. And I'm Liren Hu. I will analyze the fundamental differences between Brazilian and Australian culture from 6 dimensions based on the cultural dimension theory proposed by the Gert Sefted. So, firstly, the 6 dimensions are power distance, individualism, uncertainty avoidance, masculinity, long-term orientation, and indulgence. From this score sheet, we can clearly see that the gap between the two countries in the cultural dimension theory proposed by the hospital. In terms of the power distance, Brazil may generally accept the unequal distribution of the power, and they tend to follow the strong rules and believe the rules of the leader. However, members of the Australian society tend to pursue the equality, emphasize the democracy and the participation. It can be seen that Australia is a country that advocated the freedom, respect to the individual independence, and has independent decision making, which may mean that Australia is more inclined to express itself in professional occasions. But Brazil is emotionally restricted and prioritizes the group interest in the social harmony. In terms of the masculinity, the gap between the two countries is not very big, and the Australia is slightly higher. In part of the uncertainty avoidance, Brazil is more restricted and when facing the uncertainty, while Australia is more flexible in this time. In terms of the long-term orientation, it can be seen that both of the short-term oriented, but Brazil is slightly more focused on the future planning. These two indicators reflect the Brazil's attitude towards the business development, the introduction of the foreign investment and the foreign trade. This shows that the people prefer a regular, planned, stable, and secure business environment, and are more inclined to pursue quality rather than risk when facing the challenges. Uh, Higher uncertainty avoidance may lead companies to adopt more conservative strategies when accelerating the layout of the new technologies and the new markets, thereby affecting the innovation of the business model. In addition, compared with two countries, both countries are more inclined to the short-term goals, such as short-term profit and market contribution. Companies tend to avoid the long-term goals and may be more inclined to the short-term goals. And this is the cultural clusters compared with Brazil and Australia examples. As we know, the definition of the cultural cluster refers to the group of the country that are highly similar in language, religion, history, institution, and values, and they are formed in the cultural system. So, for example, in the Brazil, motivational companies and open offices often encounter the resistance, and employees rely on more clearly leadership guidance. In Australia, all members can freely express their views on the direction of the project in the team meeting. So this is all about the differences of the Brazil and Australia examples. And so in summary, while globalizations and the technology exchange bringing the Brazilian and the Australian culture closer together in some areas. However, such as hierarchy, risk toleration, and individualism continue to shape distinct national identities. As a result, we are seeing some convergence, but continue divergence in some areas. This has the impact on business attraction, foreign trade, innovation, and education, all of which are affected by the cultural differences. So this all about these changes and the differences are influenced by the cultural differences. So that's all, and this is a reference list. Thanks for watching, and welcome to the next group member to do that introduction.
Turning to my section, I will be talking about Brazil's industries in international trade based on two major trade theories: absolute advantage, comparative advantage, and finally, I will show which appropriate theory is best when trading in Brazil. Let's start with Adam Smith's theory of absolute advantage. In his famous book, The Wealth of Nations, Smith argued that countries should focus on producing goods they can make more efficiently than others. So if Brazil can produce something faster or cheaper than another country, it should specialize in that. Now, Brazil actually has a lot of natural advantages. For example, the export chart of minerals and energy shows that Brazil has abundant iron, oil, and biofuels. They are all its advantageous industries. In addition, think about agriculture. Brazil is one of the world's top exporters of soybeans and coffee. These are products Brazil can export while importing goods which less efficient at making. And we can't forget tourism. Thanks to Brazil's beautiful landscapes and cultural attractions, this industry is becoming more competitive globally. Moving on to David Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage, Ricardo builds on Smith's ideas but goes a step further. He argued that even if a country isn't the best at producing anything, it should still specialize in industries where its opportunity cost is the lowest. To explain this, Ricardo gave the example of Portugal producing wine and Britain making clothes. Each country should focus on what they can do best relative to other choices. The importance of production efficiency is reflected in the table below. In Brazil's case, it may not have a global lead in high-tech manufacturing, but it's still more efficient in agriculture compared to trying to produce electronics or cars. Looking at the real data, Brazil's manufacturing exports are relatively low, which suggests that manufacturing, especially advanced manufacturing, is not a strong idea in terms of labor and efficiency. But in agriculture, Brazil performs incredibly well. According to Brazil's Ministry of Agriculture, the 2019 to 2020 grain production reached 250 million tons, a massive number. At the same time, it may be more expensive for Brazil to produce high-tech products than other countries such as Germany or Japan. So Brazil can export crops and import manufactured products like cars or electronics from countries like Germany or Japan, while those industries are more developed and cost effectively. Finally, when we think about which theory Brazil should follow, I believe comparative advantage is the best fit. Why? Because it's more flexible, more realistic, and encourages countries to focus on what they can do best in their resources. Even if Brazil isn't top one in everything, it can still be benefit hugely by focusing on low cost, high efficiency industries. And actually, Brazil has already been heading in this direction. The government has started supporting industries with comparative advantage through public policies. When Australian companies come in, they can bring dairy products from the livestock industry to complement Brazilian agriculture. So in conclusion, while absolute advantage gives us a good starting point, comparative advantage is a smarter, more practical pace for Brazil's growth in international trade. Thank you for listening. And next one is John Low's part about Brazil's instruments of trade policy.
Thank you, Tenji. In this section, I will explore the trade policy instrument used by Brazil and explain which international trade theory this policy reflects. We will also look at real-world examples that show how Brazil's policy impact international business. The government used a range of trade policy tools, including tariffs on import goods, subsidies to domestic producers, import quota to limit competition, and anti-dumping duty to prevent unfair pricing from foreign companies. For example, Brazil puts high tariffs on things like imported cars and electronics. These tariffs raise the price of foreign goods, giving local producers a better chance to compete. At the same time, Brazil gives financial support by offering subsidies to local industry, especially in agriculture and aircraft. Now, let's talk about two real-world examples to show what international trade theory are behind it. One great example is Embraer, Brazil's aircraft company. It started with lots of help from the government. Embraer received government subsidies, support for research and development, and export financing. That support helped Embraer grow into one of the biggest aircraft makers in the world, and now it competes with Boeing and Airbus. This reflects the new trade theory, which explains how economies of scale and first-mover advantage help certain firms dominate global markets. It also shows how strategic trade theory works in practice. The government used tools like subsidies to help national firms break into the industry. Now, let's turn to the other example, agriculture. Because of its land, climate, and low labor costs, Brazil is one of the best exporters of soybeans, coffee, and beef in the world. The government also offers export incentive subsidies for equipment and credit, and by building roads and ports to make shipping easier. However, Brazil could make its own dairy product or wheat. It's still more efficient to import those. This fits well with comparative advantage. Brazil focuses on what it does best. At the same time, the government restricts imports of dairy and wheat to protect rural jobs and domestic producers, which align with the influence in industry argument and neo-mercantilism theory. In summary, Brazil used different trade policy instruments such as tariffs, subsidies, and export supports to protect and grow key industry. By analyzing two cases like Embraer and agriculture, we can see how these policy instruments reflect major trade theory. New trade theory and strategic trade theory explain how government supports help Embraer become globally competitive. Comparative advantage shows why Brazil focus on agriculture exports like soybeans and beef, and influence in industry arguments and new mercantilism help explain why the government restrict imports to protect local jobs. Overall, Brazil's strategy is a great example of how government can use trade policy to shape global business outcomes. That's all. Thank you for listening.